Hi, everybody. How's it going today? And welcome to Ellensburg, Washington, USA. I'm your host, Nick Zentner. This is Central Washington University, early on a Sunday morning. The local time is, something like 8:48 a.m., and we'll begin our program at the top of the hour. That's about 12 minutes from now. This is live right now. We have about 250 people with us. We're waiting and ready to go. The date is December 17th, Sunday, December 17th, 2023. And I see that we're 5 by 5, and that makes me very happy. How's everything going with you today? I hope everything's going well. I'm going to go right to the calendar to make sure that we know that we're taking a break after today's show. We're going to stick, I hereby declare, we're going to stick with our Thursdays at noon and Sundays at 9 a.m. for the rest of the winter. So that's official. And I'll make this announcement a couple more times today. But here we are before Christmas. All of our boys are home, and they'll be with us all week. So I'm going to be hanging out with those guys and doing all sorts of stuff. And then we will be back at it on Thursday, December 28th. At noon, and we'll do a show Sunday morning, January 31st, and then on we go into January. Okay, so that's the plan. I'll announce that a couple more times. We're still 5 by 5. Terrific. Let me email the guest, and then I can ask where you're viewing from. But we do have a guest. You know him, Joel Gombiner. And so give me just a second. Let me give you a shot out the window while I do this. Corner cam, 33 degrees Fahrenheit, dark and gloomy, no snow. Add the guest. Copy the link. That's a link for Joel. Convert to plain link. Gmail to Gmail. And away that goes to Seattle, Washington this morning. Where are you viewing from this morning? We say hi to a few of you before we begin the program. Pensacola, Florida, the Dalles, Oregon, Queen Anne Pile of Gravel, Lake Sammamish. Oh boy, hello. We got 500 now, and the thing's scrolling incredibly fast. I'm scrolling back. Mission Hills, California, Nebraska, West Allis, Wisconsin, Boise, Idaho, Sammamish, Las Vegas, baby. Parker, British Columbia, West Palm Beach, Florida, Bremerton, Washington, Boone, North Carolina, Mount Pleasant, Iowa, Medina, Ohio, mostly North Americans today. Oh, now that I said that, there's John. He's near Lincoln, England. Tea time here, enjoying cream eclair. Okay, John, you know how to live over there. Wonderful. Jealous. Pat from Yakima, Thief, River Falls, Minnesota, Vancouver Island. Colfax, Louisiana, Fairview, Oregon. Where's Fairview, Oregon, fellow Ledbetter? Fairview, not Lakeview, Fairview. Gresham, Oregon, Red Deer, Alberta, Lisle, Washington. That says somebody in Lisle in the Columbia River Gorge. Happy holidays, they say. Thank you. Dorset, UK, Vancouver, Washington, Gold Bar, Washington, Phoenix, Arizona, Visalia, California, Moses Lake, uppercase. Let's go down to live. I say, let's go down to live. What that? Thank you. Oh boy. Meteast, Wyoming. Hello, Kay Thomas. Fairbanks, Alaska. It's plus 19 Fahrenheit today, reports Don. Don's got his weather report. Sven's in Hamlin, Germany. Squim, Washington. Penticton, British Columbia. Hello, Janet. Black Lake, New Mexico. Donald is in West Lockhart, Texas. Joel Gombiner is in the green room. Can you hear me, Joel? Can you wave and confirm that you can hear me, young man? Attaboy. Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Joel, for joining us. I'm thinking 10, 15 minutes of me before we bring you in, something like that. Jack is in North Ellensburg. Paul's in Glasgow, Scotland. People are saying good morning to Joel now. That's nice. Dennis is in Tucson. I'm super relaxed this morning. One, because we're about to take a break. Two, because I don't know a frickin' thing about the Astoria Fan. So it's not like I have a bunch of stuff I have to get out of my head. I mean, I'm going to set up our conversation with Joel, but I'm going to just be, well, I have less swirling in my mind simply because I'm so out of it with the Astoria Fan. So we'll learn a bunch together this morning. I have no doubt. In fact, I'm slouching in my chair. Come on, man. Let's go. Come on, boy. There's Glenn. Google Earth Glenn. Good morning, Glenn. Riverton, Illinois. Natchez, Washington. LOL, wherever that is. Just kidding. Spanaway, Washington. Prosser, Washington. Red Bank, South Carolina. Tallahassee, Florida. Hello, Cody. Farmington, New Mexico. Kirks in Göteborg, Sweden. Minneapolis, that's Ray. Laren, the Netherlands. Who is that watching from the Netherlands? That's Garrett, the Dutch night owl from the Netherlands. San Diego is beautiful this morning, says Nina. I wish I could say the same for here. Petaluma, California. Jerome Lessman from Nanaimo, British Columbia. Jerome Lessman from Nanaimo, British Columbia. Good morning, Jerome. Jerome. All right. Any other programming notes? Let's see. I've already announced the break in the schedule. I'll do that again a couple more times today. Randy Lewis did give a memorable talk yesterday down at the museum. A number of you were there. Kirk from Philomath, Oregon, probably gets the award for traveling the farthest. Kirk came all the way up from the Corvallis, Oregon area to listen to Randy's talk in person at the Kittitas County Museum. That was yesterday, Saturday, December 16th. Good times with Randy. And I don't know if I'll be able to get out again with Randy and film. Unclear, because he's very busy, but some of his family members expressed interest in doing something. I said, even with filming, or you just want to show me stuff? No, I think maybe filming if you feel like it. So I'm going to try to follow up on those leads and connect with or follow through on a couple more opportunities to perhaps capture some rich Native American history. And what a privilege it is to hear from, to hear some of those stories. So we'll see if that happens. Good. All right. So can I double check one more time? The mic's okay, and the audio and the video. The mic and the audio. What? Let's go. Let's go. You're too relaxed. Joel has a screen that's shared here as well, so that's good. He's all business. He's ready to go. Okay. I solved the scratchy microphone somehow. I don't know how, to be honest, but I'm unplugging it and plugging it every time. I'm restarting the computer every time. At this point, it's just black magic. I'm doing all sorts of rituals in here just to hope that everything works each time we do it. And now, of course, that I've commented on the technology, there will almost certainly be a problem today, but maybe not. Okay, I'm going to go take a walk. I remember to have my keys on Sunday morning so I can get actually back in the building, and I need to get my head right and get ready to go. I think I'll just give you this shot because it's so gloomy outside. So, thank you for being here. Always a thrill to have so many live watching these sessions. We're up to 600 now, and more will trickle in as we begin. I hope you enjoy this session on the Astoria Fan, starring Joel Gombiner. We'll start in 3 minutes. Thank you. Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this episode on the Astoria Fan, episode J. This is a live stream series, A to Z, and we're approaching the middle of the alphabet, I guess. I haven't counted, but we're getting there. And J is for Joel Gombiner, University of Washington graduate, recent graduate with a PhD. And Joel will be back with us. No, Joel is back. We had him just 2 weeks ago on Sunday, a couple weeks ago, but he's so good. And you remember Joel had some custom-made maps for us, and I think, not sure, but I think he has a few new custom-made maps for this session as well on the Astoria Fan. So that's coming. Here's what I have in mind for this episode. 10-15 minutes of me setting up our discussion with Joel. We go to Joel, we bring him in, we look at some maps. Joel and I go back and forth. I've got second grade level questions about the Astoria Fan. I know nothing. Even though he asked me to post a bunch of papers, Joel, I tried those papers like 3 different times. I don't follow them. So the papers are helpful to a few that have deep knowledge, but I'm not one of them. So I'll maybe understand the papers better once I have a conversation with you, but we'll get to the papers in a bit. After the visit with Joel, I'm thinking Joel for a solid hour or something like that. When we're done with Joel, I do have some story time at the end, visiting the Bretz timeline. We're going to get him back to Seattle to teach at the University of Washington for 1 year, and then he goes back to Chicago to start his teaching career at the University of Chicago. And that's a perfect way to end things as kind of a cliffhanger before our Christmas break. Speaking of which, so we're going to stick with this schedule for the rest of the winter. I flirted with the idea of doing Saturdays, but I'm not doing that. So we're sticking with Thursdays at noon and Sundays at 9 a.m. for the balance of the winter as we continue to roll through the alphabet. And here we are on Sunday, December 17th. I will not see you until after Christmas, and our next episode will be episode K at noon on Thursday, December 28th. We'll squeeze in another December show, and then we're into January after the new year. So that's the idea about getting us continued through the holiday break. So I do want to leave things kind of open-ended, but a couple of cliffhangers before we get back together in late December. Okay? Let's try a couple hooks verbally, and then I've got a couple of things in the document camera as well. So I've been teaching about the Missoula floods for 30 years here at Central Washington University, and I've made plenty of video programs by now and other kinds of things. So I'm not a rookie with thinking about the Missoula floods. And of course, most of my interest and attention is in Eastern Washington. And we're trying to visualize the water and the speed of the water and the depth of the water coming over Dry Falls or the Grand Coulee or Moses Coulee or the Cheney-Palouse Track, or what did the water look like in Glacial Lake, Missoula? And what was the ice dam like in northern Idaho? And so on and so on and so on. And then if we're willing to go downstream from that, we say, well, the water was held up at Wallula Gap, and then it finally threaded its way through Wallula Gap and got into the Columbia River Gorge. Every drop of Ice Age floodwater came down the Columbia River Gorge on its way to Portland, Oregon. And then down, this is old hat, I can do this in my sleep. Downstream of Portland, Oregon, there's another constriction in the gorge there, and so, I don't even know the name of it. And then there's water that's backed up all the way south to Eugene, Oregon, and flooding the Willamette Valley with quiet water. And then the water drains to the ocean. And then the water drains to the ocean. That's like the last little tagline at the end. Like, how much thought have I given into what that water looks like as it goes by Kelso Longview? How much have I visualized the water going by Astoria, Oregon? And is that flood water entering into the Pacific Ocean at Astoria, Oregon? No, it is not. Because presumably each time we have one of these major Ice Age floods, the coastline is not at Astoria. It's way further west. In other words, offshore, because the continental shelf is exposed because we're in a glacial time. So we're not even dumping the floodwater into the ocean at Astoria. We're dumping it in someplace offshore. I don't know how many miles. And what did that floodwater look like? Was it crystal clear water? Probably not. Well, why do you say that? Well, it's probably chocolate milk. Why? Well, all that loess that was picked up. Well, I thought all the loess was deposited in Willamette. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. I don't know. So what color does the floodwater look like as it heads to the ocean? And was it chocolate milk or was it chocolate milkshake? Are there icebergs that can survive the entire trip from Sandpoint, Idaho to the Pacific Ocean? Are there icebergs floating around in the tidal zone? And you're like, what are you doing? What are we talking about today? We're talking about the Astoria Fan, man. That's the title. It's a submarine fan. It's a pile of dirt under the waves of the Pacific Ocean out there right now. And it has been looked at a little bit, maybe a lot. I'm not quite sure. And what's that pile of dirt like in the Astoria Fan? Is it all loess? Is it coarser than loess? Are there pebbles? Are there cobbles? Are there boulders? And then the main reason we're talking to Joel, how much history is recorded in the Astoria Fan? And that gets us into talking about marine isotope stages, which I know very little about. Here's another verbal hook, then we'll go to my course pack, and then we go to Joel. Here's another way to tease the episode or to hook you with the episode. We're visiting with Joel now, as opposed to letter Y or something about this topic, because I think we need to get coached up on where we are today, understanding possible flood times during the Pleistocene. Now, if you go way back to session B with Jerome Lessman, where we're doing open questions, I had 4 of them, if you recall. And the second of the 4 was, how many floods happened earlier than 30,000 years ago? Did any floods happen? Did any Ice Age floods in Eastern Washington happen earlier than 30,000 years ago? Because that's not the main storyline with the Missoula flood story. Pretty confident there were major floods earlier than 30,000 years ago. Okay, well then, what dates are reasonable based on our current understanding of the Astoria Fan and the marine isotope record worldwide with marine deposits? You want a more specific hook? Like just last episode, we were talking about Bretz in Eastern Washington with viewer Glenn and Google Earth. And again, looking ahead, a little bit of a teaser. In January, we're going to be following in Bretz's footsteps, literally, thanks to Glenn. And we're going to be looking at those papers that Bretz was putting out in the 1920s, scientific papers that were published and through peer review and everything else. And Bretz is saying, look, I've got 2 floods. This is J. Harlan Bretz in the 1920s. I've got 2 floods in Eastern Washington. I have a major flood called the Spokane flood that's an older flood. An older, huge flood called the Spokane flood, water coming directly from the Spokane ice sheet. And then Bretz says, I have a younger, minor flood that I'm going to call the Wisconsin flood. This is Bretz talking, 1925, 1928, even 1923. So an older major flood and a younger minor flood. And in his papers, he says there's considerable time that has elapsed between the old Spokane flood and the young Wisconsin flood. Now, how many years are we talking? In the papers, Bretz never was willing to say, here's my date for the Spokane flood. But viewer Sharon from Malaga found all sorts of newspaper clippings this summer and passed them on to me. And thank you, Sharon. I'm about to dig into them more and more. And when Bretz would talk to a newspaper reporter in 1925, oh, who am I talking to? Says Bretz. I'm talking to a reporter from the Chicago Tribune. Yeah, I've got a Spokane flood out there in Washington. It happened 100,000 years ago. Oh, I'm Bretz. I'm talking to the Kansas City Star. Yeah, you're doing an article on my Spokane flood. It happened 130,000 years ago. Oh, Milwaukee Journal, Spokane flood, 125,000 years ago. Viewer homework. Are you up for it? I continue to have all sorts of help by viewer email, and I really appreciate it. Not required, of course. Here's a historical question for some of you. What was known in the scientific community in 1925 about global climate history. 100 years ago, 1925, let's just pick a date. 1925, what did we know about global climate history? And who was doing the work? Was it T.C. Chamberlain, who's going to be a major character showing up after Christmas, by the way? Is this Milankovich's work? Is 1925 too late or too early for the Milankovitch stuff? Are there other people doing important global climate work? I don't think Joel will know the answer. We talked about it briefly yesterday. But if some of you could figure out somehow what influenced Bretz into using those numbers, they're all in the neighborhood of 100,000 years ago or so. And that's one thing we'll do today. How does that match with our current understanding of marine isotope records? And you're like, it doesn't matter. Bretz got off of the Spokane flood in the haven't you read Bretz's papers in the 1950s? He said the Spokane flood was wrong and all the water came from Missoula. Well, that's the company line, but I'm not totally sure of that. I think focus was shifted to Glacial Lake Missoula, but I'll read those papers again as we go on in January, but I'm not sure Bretz ever flat out said, I was wrong about the Spokane flood. I was wrong about an old flood being major. I'm not sure he ever got to that point. And that's going to be one of the main things we work on together. And if he got to that point, then fine. But if he didn't, then I want to continue thinking about these older episodes. One more thing, Joel, 5 minutes, and then we're coming to you. I think I'm on schedule. If we go to my course pack from this fall, and this is a series of cartoons that I use when I teach Geology 101 on a regular basis. I've done this with you before, so I'm going to do it very, very quickly. This is from just this past fall. So here's the Pleistocene ice sheet, the Cordilleran and the Laurentide. Okay, and here's that ice sheet today up in Greenland. Fine. This is what I was taught at the University of Wisconsin in the 1980s. And I think it's fair to say this was the current thinking in the 1980s. When I was in college, 4 major cold times over the last 2.6 million years worth of time. And interglacials in between. Nebraskan, Kansan, Illinois, and Wisconsin. Maybe if you're an old timer, you remember those terms. Here's the same planet with the same time frame, but now, and this is the way I teach it, there are not 4 glacials, cold times, 4 times when the ice came down from Canada. There were 33 times. And you're like, where are you getting this information? The answer is the ocean. And the way that I teach it, and I'm looking to update the way that I teach it, involves deep sea sediment in the ocean floors of the world and realizing that there's variable amounts of oxygen-16 in those sediments. There's a layer of deep sea mud that has lots of O16. There's another layer that has very few oxygen-16 poor. And using this cycle of pulling O16 out of the water and locking it into the ice and changing the chemistry of the water in the ocean, we can say something about global climate by going down here in the dark to these most fragile, delicate beds. Because the idea is, if you go back, here, where is this information coming from? It's coming from land. It's coming from up here. It's looking at glacial till, like Bretz was doing in Puget Lowland, like Bailey Willis was doing in Puget Lowland, like T.C. Chamberlain is going to be doing in the 1880s from Montana all the way to the New England area, including the Midwest. Those 4 major advances of the ice were based on glacial till or glacial drift deposits. But the idea is you're going to keep bringing the ice sheet down and erasing stuff that was deposited in the previous advance. So this is by definition going to be an incomplete record, isn't it? These glacial deposits are a bunch of loose piles of sand and gravel and boulders. They're delicate. They're going to get destroyed or screwed up by the next advance of the ice. So that's why going under the waves of the Pacific and the Atlantic Ocean to look at deep sea marine records is a more complete way to view the history of the Pleistocene. Last comment, and then we're going to Joel. So I was teaching the 4 advances of the ice in the late 1980s when I first started teaching at Miami of Ohio, north of Cincinnati. That was my first college teaching job. And then Liz and I moved out here, started teaching at Central. And those first couple of years at Central in the early 90s, I was still teaching Nebraska, Kansas, Illinois, and Wisconsin. And then in 1994, I can still remember the talk. There was a guy named Doug Clark, who's had a long career at Western Washington University, but this is back when Doug was applying for jobs, and he applied for the geomorphology job here at Central in 1994. There were 3 finalists, Doug Clark, Jim O'Connor, and Lisa Ely. Lisa got the job. Jim O'Connor is probably going to be on this show, this series later in the winter. He's done a lot of floods work based out of Portland. But it was Doug Clark's interview lecture where he started talking about these marine isotopes and dozens of advances of the ice and dozens of retreats of the ice. And I put my hand up in the middle of the lecture, 1994. And I said, excuse me, I know you're in the middle of your interview and everything, but I can't hold it. Aren't there just 4 advances and retreats of the ice? That's what I was taught. And he handled it well, but he's like, basically, look, get with the times, man. No, we don't view 4 advances anymore. And this was 1994. So that's why I changed that lecture in the 101 class, and I've been teaching it that way ever since. It's time to get some new information from somebody who's thought a lot about marine isotope stages, the Astoria Fan, Joel Gombiner from Seattle, Washington. Let's bring him in. Good morning, Joel. How are you?
Good morning. Doing well.
That's my intro for you, baby. We can go wherever we want to go. And can you, so one of the papers that was selected for this episode is yours. From 2016. Let's start with that. You must know that paper the best. Why were you thinking about submarine fans at all when you were starting your PhD at Washington?
So that was work I did for my undergraduate thesis at Columbia, where I just wanted to study a topic in the Pacific Northwest, and I was given this enigmatic sediment core with laminated glacial lake outburst flood layers. And the question was, where did they come from? So the advisor I was working with had this idea that the Missoula floods, because they're tapping the Proterozoic belt supergroup source, should be bringing this unique composition of sediment out into the ocean. And could that be the source of these layers offshore Vancouver Island? So we looked, and sure enough, they had a unique composition that matched that hypothesis.
Well, wait a minute. So you're in New York City at Columbia University. What's your professor's name? And was this person involved in Ice Age flood research out here in the Northwest?
Sydney Hemming, and she made her name studying the Heinrich events in the North Atlantic.
Okay.
Which are these also enigmatic sedimentary deposits out in the middle of the ocean that could be related to floods, could be related to glacial surging and armadas of icebergs floating out into the middle of the ocean.
Oh, I like that. I'm going to steal that. Yeah. Armadas of icebergs. Okay. Mm-hmm. Good job.
Yeah.
You're thoroughly wide awake this morning. That's nice.
So she was trying to sort of apply that concept to the North Pacific, which just didn't get the same amount of attention, and using similar tools that she had developed in Eastern North America and in the North Atlantic. And so I was the one who got to go through the mud and make little mud clouds and then analyze their argon isotopic composition.
Huh.
And so we saw these uniquely old argon ages in this core that were consistent with the source of the sediment being from the Missoula floods.
Is she still working on this stuff in the Northwest?
She's global. I mean, she works on marine sediments all around the planet and argon geochronology applied to a variety of different questions.
And did she just say, well, Joel, you're a promising student. I'm going to give you a project. You have no interest in this, but here you go. Or did you express?
Well, I wanted to work on something regional to where I was from. and she had been talking to another scientist, Ingrid Hendy at University of Michigan, who had been working on this core from Vancouver Island, where they were relating things to sort of the Juan de Fuca lobe, and but they hadn't really quite figured out this. They'd identified the sedimentary facies as glacial lake outburst floods. But were they from the Juan de Fuca lobe? Were they from the Puget lobe? Were they from the north, from the south? So the composition of the mud can give us a clue as to where the material is coming from.
This is great. So we're shot out of a cannon right now. Like we're getting in deep right away. I can feel it. So tell me once again, if you've already said it, like what was the main takeaway from that paper that you did basically as a senior thesis?
Well, I mean, it informs what happened to the water and the sediment when it entered the ocean, but it's sort of this tail of material that veered off to the north, potentially as sort of a mud plume. And how exactly that worked is still unclear.
Okay.
And then to the degree we believe that those layers are the Missoula floods, the core is extremely well dated from radiocarbon dating.
Okay.
So it gives us a number of events and a timing of the events in a way that we don't have in terrestrial records. So when we look, for example, at the Glacial Lake Columbia record, we have all these events and we have the time between them, but there's no datable material in the in the sediment. So there's one radiocarbon age for the whole section. Whereas in the ocean, we have this rain of marine organisms that give us these really nice radiocarbon datums throughout the entire Missoula flood section. So that was one of the takeaways, was the timing and then the process of how the flows are interacting once they get into the ocean, which is what we're going to get into today.
We are, but I want to keep teasing this just a little bit. I don't know. I want to take my time with you. There's so much we can do, and I'm sure the viewers already have a ton
so much. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so that's new for me. I didn't totally get that in my head. So you're kind of rare already that your first Ice Age floods work is underwater off the coast of Vancouver Island. You're kind of up to speed with some of the basics out there and the geochronology in that set of deposits. Then you're on land and you're on Moses Coulee and you're kind of tackling it that way. I don't know how many people, it seems like either you're a marine person or a terrestrial person. I'm not sure there's folks doing both, or are there?
Yeah, there are. And for example, Sydney is I mean, she was my first mentor, and she was very much a geologist from Texas who, had a rock hammer and was on land looking at real rocks. And then she became a marine geologist. And so but you're right, there is a divide, broadly speaking, between marine geologists and terrestrial geologists, and oftentimes the interaction sort of ends at the coastline.
Well, yeah, I mean, I snuck in for the first morning of the Penrose conference this past June, where a bunch of leading outburst floods people were all in the same room, and I only spent a couple hours there, so I don't have a full. But I was surprised. There was this marine community, and then the European community, and then the two Pacific Northwest folks. All these different. Think of all the expertise and all the angles with the Ice Age floods, and it's rare to find somebody who can speak languages of all those different groups. There's some, but I mean, that's a challenge. I mean, for sure. So we're I think dipping into this marine thing. I'm guilty as the next. Like, I don't know a damn thing out there. So I'm excited to see what you've got. Do you want to start with some maps, or do you want to just talk a little bit more this way? Because I've got some of these really basic elementary school questions.
Yeah, I mean, the way I set it up was to follow off your work on the setting up the marine oxygen isotope stack, because that's such important context for the time question and the multiple glaciation question, and this question we're talking about right now of linking the marine record, which is this chemical record it's not direct evidence of glaciation. It's a chemical isotopic record that's been interpreted in terms of glaciation with the hard evidence on land. I thought that was such a beautiful demonstration of 6 cycles from land, 33 from the ocean, and then the history of how the marine isotope record kind of took over from the terrestrial geologic record.
Yeah.
In terms of social dynamics. That was such a fascinating story of asking that question in the 90s and sort of being told, no, the marine isotope record is the sort of the big dog now.
Hey man, I got a full disclosure.
But this is an ongoing conversation. I mean, this is not over. There's back and forth going on here in quaternary science between trying to reconcile. But I thought we could just look at the oxygen isotope stack. That's what I have.
Let's do it
up right now. Yeah.
Let's do it. I'm going to bring your slides in, and oh, wonderful. Wow. So some are shrieking in horror. Some are like, finally, let's go. Let's dig in. And some are in between. So you've got your little pluses and minuses where you can zoom us in occasionally to really look at some detail, but please go for it, Joel.
Right. I mean, this is the data, or it's actually a model, but it's the last 5 million years of the oxygen isotope concentration composition of the water in the ocean.
Okay.
Which is what you explained as recorded in these foraminifera that make their shells out of seawater. So that these little organisms that are just recording seawater chemistry, and we can drill that up and reconstruct it. And that's what the Lasecki and Ramo paper is explaining, how they do that.
Well, I got to say, Joel, I expected a huge change in that signal exactly at 2.6 million years ago. I don't know if I see that.
No, you don't. And that's a fascinating part of it. I mean, where does the Pleistocene even start in here? So just to orient people, this is 5 million years ago, and this is the present.
Okay.
And the way to read this is the delta 18O of benthic foraminifera from this stack. So it's a bunch of records that have been combined into a global record. And whether that's even valid is an open question. And then the way it's been interpreted, and they knew this at the time, was that this number gets heavier. So I've inverted the y-axis here. So bigger numbers going down.
Yeah.
When the water gets colder, and when you take the light isotopes out of the ocean and put them in ice sheets.
Yeah.
So it's a proxy for two things at the same time.
I see.
It's a proxy for seawater temperature and for global ice volume.
Huh.
And in that paper, they make the assumption that the bottom water temperature of the ocean basically doesn't change. So it's mostly a proxy for ice volume. And that understanding is changing over time. We're learning that it does change. So it's maybe less of a proxy for ice volume than we thought.
Mm-hmm.
But to the degree it is a proxy for ice volume, you can read this as the world is getting icier over the last 5 million years.
Yeah.
And there are cycles of glaciation and deglaciation. And then the biggest ice volumes occur within the last million years. So I think that's really relevant for our discussion about how many episodes of channel scabland flooding and Cordilleran ice sheets growing large enough to create Lake Missoula, or to introduce floods into the Columbia Basin. So can I zoom in a little bit?
Yeah, please. That's great.
Where's my hand?
There's your hand.
Okay, so we spend almost all of our time talking about this glaciation. This is the last glaciation, and this is the present deglaciation. And like you said, this is just one of many spikes, but it's only one of 4 that reaches this amplitude.
Interesting. Well, I'm okay. I'm gonna pause for just a sec. So I'm gonna hide this for just a sec. So the very sharp viewers out there are going to be frustrated, I think, because I'm going to hide this every once in a while and come back to Joel and I talking. But I think I want to include everybody, and I'm just imagining a bunch of our viewers like, oh man, I can't stick with this. I'll give this 5 more minutes, but this is like an EKG. I don't know what the hell's going on. So I'm trying to think of everybody watching this. Okay, that's why I'm cutting in occasionally. That was a highlight already this morning, Joel. So I want to come right back to that plot. But what do the sediments look like to get that data? I'm thinking of them as these super fine grained layers of mud, deep sea mud, basically, that are a bunch of little skeletons of radiolaria and foraminifera that are locking in this chemistry business in the water. Is that the accurate? What are we sampling there to get that plot?
Exactly. Yeah, we're in the middle of the open ocean. We're far away from the continents.
Yeah.
And the only sediment coming in is dust, wind-blown dust that blows all over the oceans.
Okay.
So we have clay from that source, some fine-grained silt, and then we have, like you said, the foraminifera and the organisms that make their shells out of seawater, and they're just constantly raining down. And so we're going to drill through that, and then we're going to sieve out the shells, dissolve them, and measure their composition. And that's how you get this record.
And it's the shells that are getting this plot. The dust is maybe helping us with time, but it's the chemistry's coming from the mud shell layers.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and the time part is, if anybody read the paper, I agree it's really confusing, but that's the most important part of the paper is how they get time, because radiocarbon dating is only going to help us for this last cycle, and then it stops at 40,000 years ago. We can't go any further back. So we don't have a direct dating method for any of this.
But
that's why this is an age model. This is not a series of radiometric dates to create this chart. So they either assume a constant sediment accumulation rate, or they assume that these cycles are driven by orbital variations on 100,000 years or 40,000 year periodicity.
But the dust, some of the dust is volcanic tephra or something, so you can get some absolute age from some of the dust going back, or is it truly nothing?
No. I mean, there's tie points, and but basically, it's really hard to date that type of sediment in the ocean. So that's the key part of that paper, is how they construct their age model. And there's a bit of circularity involved in the way they do it. They assume that the cycles are from Milankovitch forcing, and then they use that to force the age model to have that that periodicity within it. So.
Okay. Well, I'm probably going to steal your thunder, but I feel like I'm very excited about that plot. So I'm surprised at how excited I am so early here. So that's all thanks to you. If we look at this just verbally, if we look at this, how far back can we go with the ice core records then? And does it?
Okay, yeah, let's keep going forward. So that's Are you looking at the? Okay.
I'm still.
So here's the last 2.5 million years. I'm going to post this again, and then this is now we're overlaying the ice core records, and we're looking at the last 1 million years.
Beautiful, Joel. Beautiful.
Okay.
You are good.
Okay. So 1 million years ago here, present day on the right, and then again this darker blue is the marine. So it's getting heavier, and then on the other axis, this cyan color is the oxygen composition of the ice in Antarctica.
Wow. So it was a proxy before, but now we have another data set that's saying it's not just fantasy land. There's something here.
And they're proxies for two different things.
Okay.
So the dark blue is telling us about the temperature of the seawater and the volume of ice on the planet.
Yeah.
And the Antarctic ice composition is telling us about the atmospheric conditions in Antarctica.
Okay.
So those things are, the fact that they're related kind of tells us that there's this global climate cycle.
Yes.
Ice is growing, the ocean is getting colder, Antarctica is getting colder. And they line up, there's differences, but they basically line up, and you can read subtle things into it, like Antarctica warms first, and then the ice starts melting on the rest of the planet. So that's telling us that there's sort of a latency of melting big ice sheets.
Yeah. Okay, well, a couple things.
Yeah.
It's not like I spend time trying to have conversations with skeptics and all that. And we're not going to go there today, I don't think.
I
But
don't need to. Yeah.
right. But for me, just as someone trying to understand this, there's something more visceral and more pleasing to imagine drilling into an ice sheet as opposed to getting this data in this bottom of the ocean thing, which I've never been to the bottom of the ocean, Joel. I can't picture that. It's not like I've been to thick ice sheets either, but it's we're drilling into bedrock, into older and older layers, Grand Canyon, whatever, and then here we go. We're going older and older into this ice sheet, and that's just pleasing to me. And I like seeing this correlation. So the aqua, the light blue, is the drilling into that. You said Antarctica ice sheet, yeah.
Yeah, this is the Epica Dome sea record. So it's from East Antarctica. It's extremely dry, so you have very low snowfall accumulation rates, and that's why the record can go back so far in time. This is the oldest one, going back 800,000 years. And it's not simple to date. There's nothing in there. There's nothing in there that you can get a direct date from.
Right.
So the way you do this one is you count literal layers, like you're counting varves, but in this case, they're seasonal patterns of snowfall. And then those layers are thinning out due to the ice flow. So you also need a model for how the ice and those layers are thinning over time. But the fact that the ice core people and the marine sediment people are coming at it from somewhat different age models, and they both see that these same cycles is a really important piece of evidence that the timing is right, or is close to right.
Sure.
And that the cycles are real. And so our real interest here is, how many Cordilleran ice sheets in Missoula floods correspond to these cold periods, basically. How many, yeah.
Well, that's the first takeaway for me, to use an overused phrase, takeaway. I may be less enthusiastic about abandoning the old 4 advanced story if you're kind of seeing half a dozen or whatever major bottoms there. Yeah.
Yep. Exactly.
And so just spitballing.
And that's where some of Kathy's work and Jerome's work, they're talking about, and Bruce's work, I think you're going to get to that later in the series, but
yeah,
we do have dates on land showing Cordilleran ice sheet glaciations prior to this big maximum down here in this period of time.
We do?
Well, I think we have we should learn more. We should do a whole episode on that. I think you're gonna go there.
Right.
The dating becomes really, really important for the on-land records to try to connect them to these marine and ice core records.
Okay.
That's our big grand challenge, I would say, is how do we connect the deposits on land to this framework from the ice cores and the marine cores?
So just calling back to the opening of this one, whether Bretz was informed by a certain paper or a certain role model or whatever, I don't know. Is it now viewed as crazy that he's saying 100,000 or 130,000 years ago for a major glacial time?
So where's 130,000? So 130,000. So again, these are the interglacials up here.
Yes.
And so this is the last interglacial at about 125,000 years ago. Okay. But right before that is the last glacial max, or is the last glacial max, the penultimate.
Yes.
And that's about 130,000 years ago.
That son of a bitch. How did he know?
So that's what we got to figure out. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. One more before we move on. This 780,000 years ago is an important date that keeps coming up when I talk to folks in Eastern Washington.
Yes.
Remind us what that date is and where that does that appear to show some significance on this plot?
I mean, that's the Brunnes Maruyama magnetic reversal event.
Okay.
It's around that age.
Yeah.
And that's important for dating things, because you can see if something is if a deposit has this a reverse magnetization. In other words, it was deposited when the North magnetic pole was on the South Pole.
Yeah.
That tells us it has to be at least that old, 780,000 years ago. So,
so that comes up
and that's really important point, because that puts us before one of these big four excursions.
Yeah.
So if we want to say there's Missoula floods happening prior to 780,000 years ago, they have to correspond to one of these less impressive maxima in global ice volume. So whether that evidence is robust is extremely important, that we can firmly say we know we have Missoula flood deposits that are greater than 800,000 years old is going to be very important for creating a model for how this ties into the global marine isotope stages.
Joel, I can't get enough of that plot. Did you make that specifically for this morning?
Yeah.
Thank you, man.
Yeah, I made another. I kind of like this little style of just giving the plots, and we'll just put them up on a PDF, and people can look at it to their heart's content.
Oh, beautiful.
Come to their own interpretations. But
wonderful.
It's such important context for setting the stage of multiple glaciations of different magnitudes. And then it's also going to be important for how we date the Astoria Fan.
Yeah.
Because we're going to date it by measuring benthic foraminifera and correlating them to this curve.
Okay. Well, let's go there. Let's proceed. You're doing a beautiful job. You are so good, Joel.
So that's the marine isotope and Antarctic water isotope background. Okay, and then we can go to the maps. Does that sound good?
Here we go. Love it. With that Atwater gray shade thing. Love it.
All right, so this is just our basic topography again. And once again, we're just color-coded from darker at low elevations and white at higher elevations.
Okay.
And for this one, I use 2 color amps. So we have one going from sea level to high elevation on land. And then we have a second one below sea level. So we've just taken all the water out of the ocean, and now we're looking at bathymetry, or the surface of what's under the ocean. And again, it's darker is lower and white is higher.
Can you zoom in a little bit? We got a lot of white border here. At least I have that.
Okay.
I'd love to be able to see perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
Please continue.
So that's how elevation is coded. And I mean, we talked last time I was on about the elevation patterns on land. I mean, we can again see the Yakima Fold and Thrust Belt, the Columbia Basin, Snake River Plain, our Cascade volcanoes. And then when we go to the ocean, this is the continental shelf. So this is relatively shallow water, and this is what was a coastal plain during the Ice Age. The sea level was near the edge of this broad shelf of sediment.
That's a fair assumption. That's a fair assumption for all 4 of our big ones, that was totally subaerial, that shelf. Okay. Okay.
And then, what's been coming up in previous weeks in our focus today is these submarine canyons. So this is a underwater canyon. This one is Astoria Canyon, and it connects through what's now a buried channel to the Columbia River.
I'm going to bug you again. Can we zoom in a bunch more, or maybe the next slide is a zoom in? But I'd love that. Joel, this is just, what a way to learn this stuff. Holy shit.
Yeah, so this is just raw, pretty low resolution topography.
Oh.
Yep. And our big question is what happens to these flows when they get to the ocean. And presumably because, so you saw the Berg 1966 paper where he uses seismic reflection data to show that there's a channel here, a buried channel that goes right into Astoria Canyon. And and so this is, but we're just kind of looking at the context now. So this is
okay, well, I have to ask it. Why not? I'll ask it right now. If I'm jumping the gun, fine. What's with these canyons? What is the most basic story about why those canyons exist? Are they everywhere worldwide at the edge of a continental shelf? Or do we corner the market on these canyons?
No, I looked up a paper, an inventory last night. There's like 6,000 submarine canyons around the world. And Astoria Canyon is one.
Okay.
So it's not that unique. I mean, but a really important point here that I would say we don't maybe fully understand is that we have a lot of canyons offshore Washington and Vancouver Island.
Yeah.
And we don't have them here offshore Oregon. And then there's more canyons to the south. But as to how they form or why they are where they are, that's a big open question in science. So I think that's the fun part of this is that there's explanations and they're probably form in different ways, but we see canyons off of active margins. We see them off of passive margins. We see them offshore places that have huge floods. We see them offshore really puny drainage basins. So they may relate to faults or tectonic setting. That there's clearly intuitively there's a way to relate them to big floods coming off of land. So people are saying in the chat, are the canyons cut by meltwater? Definitely, just possibly, but I'm just going to say we don't. If anybody wants to send me a paper saying this is how submarine canyons form or how these ones formed, go ahead. But you'll find competing explanations in the literature.
Well, I'm going to hold you up. So this is reminiscent right now of Mima mounds.
Yep.
So here's these things people have been looking at for 100 years. Bretz is one of the first to think about the Mima mounds in South Puget Sound. Now, I don't think we had bathymetric maps to look at these submarine canyons for 100 years. Maybe we did. I don't know. But the part where you go, well, yeah, it must be a seismic story. Mima mounds, let's say. It must be a seismic story. Shaking to go, well, no, there's some in Louisiana. Oh, okay. Well, then I guess it's a freeze thaw. Well, how about Louisiana? And then, and so, yes, you cannot find one explanation that satisfies all these locations that you find this pattern ground or these Mima mounds. I suspect it's the same story here, that you come up with a Cascadia story for the submarine canyons, and then, well, there's not Cascadia earthquakes off of Newfoundland or whatever, and you just keep going and going. So I find that amazing that there's.
I mean, just to zoom in. And talk, because I'm seeing people in the chat saying, okay, they're turbidity currents, and we're going to talk about what those are.
Okay.
And that makes sense, but they also form from headward erosion, just like canyons on land.
God.
So you can see these amphitheater-like canyon heads that are clearly eating back into the continental shelf. Okay, so where did those start? That started at a scarp somewhere, probably on the lower shelf as a little scarp. And then you can just imagine it sort of eating its way backward. And is that related to flows on land, or is that just submarine landslides in this amphitheater causing headward erosion? And the canyon forms first, and then it receives and transmits turbidity currents, but it doesn't need to flow via turbidity currents.
Okay, well, we're to the second grade questions from me. Yeah. Like, is anybody saying major floods from the continent are somehow continuing to flow way out there and digging into the edge of the continental shelf? Is there a one-to-one correlation between stuff happening on land and the position of those canyons?
Globally, no. Here, to some degree, there is a pretty strong relationship. Right? Because the Columbia River connects to Astoria Canyon. So there's just a clear geomorphic connection between this huge river system that discharges glacial lake outburst floods like the Missoula floods and this very prominent submarine canyon. But does that work for all of them, right? I mean,
right.
Maybe let's go to the next map here.
Good.
Just gonna zoom out.
And you made these maps for us too, didn't you?
This is all. Yeah, this is all.
Oh.
I mean, it's for the science, right? You guys are
it's
inspiring me to do the science.
It's more Christmas gifts. This is the second show in a row. We're just having guests bring gifts, man. This is so sweet.
Yeah, and I'm just looking at the chat, and people are talking about the Monterey Canyon, which is huge and does not have a connection to mega floods or big discharges. So that's a really good point about the way that canyons can form potentially in different mechanisms by different processes. Okay, so let's go. So now we're going to overlay the Pleistocene discharges onto the same map. So same thing.
Again, can you push in quite a bit? Like I'm seeing mostly white border. I'm getting greedy because I'm salivating.
There's so much to see. It's such a big regional story.
God, how do you make these maps? Good. Okay, keep it going, boy. This is wonderful.
All right. So just to walk through this, I'm sure folks recognize, they could probably walk us through it, but Glacial Lake Missoula, and here's its ice dam. Glacial Lake Columbia. Here's our Waterville Plateau Tunnel Channel Network. This is all of the area inundated by Missoula floods or other floods. Puget Lowland Tunnel Channel Network, and I had to throw in the Lake Bonneville and its flood path.
Sure.
Because all this stuff is ending up in the Pacific Ocean. These are all sources of major flows and sediment transport events that ultimately feed into this. So I've just traced the outlines of submarine canyons, and a lot of them coalesce. It's a dendritic system that coalesces into this deep sea channel on the seafloor called Cascadia Channel that winds its way here, way out into the middle of the Pacific plate. And then the other thing on here is this brown shading is the outline. This is where we're ultimately going today. This is the Astoria Fan, and this is the Nidnat Fan. So these are bodies of sandy sediment that are related to discharges through the submarine canyons that spread out and create these lobe-shaped deposits.
Can we push in on those two fans, those two chocolate brown things? And can I ask a couple basic things just to spur this a little bit? I think I did read the thickness of one of those fans is something like 10,000 feet thick, or like they're talking about 3,000 meters, I think. Does that sound reasonable to you?
We'll look at the seismic reflection data for Site 1 for a seismic line across this, where you're shooting sound waves down into the sediment, and you can see the reflection between the underlying basaltic basement and the thickness of sediment.
Wow.
So there's a trench here. This is a subduction zone trench, and it's filled in with sediment.
Yeah.
So if you go to Japan to a similar subduction zone, there's a big pit here, the Marianas Trench, and our trench is totally filled in with the brown is really hard to see. I can make that.
No, it's good. It's good. That's super interesting. Yeah. So our trench is just filled with crap, potentially because of the Ice Age flood story in the last couple of million years.
Yeah, and from glaciation in general, and sediment input and the dynamics of the system. So it's some combination of all this stuff. But yeah, the Ice Age floods seem to be a huge source of this sedimentation. Absolutely.
So again, I'm struggling here because I don't want to steal the clear order that you have in your talk, but at the same time, you said I don't want to give a lecture. I want to just have a conversation, which I appreciate. So I'm just going to go for it. So I'm just imagining a bunch of fine sediment again, like we were talking about with the marine isotope record, but that's not what I should visualize for these light brown piles, right? There's more than fine stuff. There's even boulders out there that are in this fan.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, so the other paper was that Griggs paper,
Yeah.
which was in Cascadia Channel.
Okay.
Out here.
Yeah.
That's kind of, and they cored gravel in that channel.
Gravel.
Cobbles,
Okay.
yeah, pebbles and cobbles. I don't know. I mean, they so in the paper he attributed it to flows, to Missoula flood flows. I don't know if it's been fully so the ways you can get big chunks of gravel. The other process is ice rafting.
Yeah.
So
from
this
there.
this is a marine.
Oh
Yeah, this is probably not drawn correctly. But there are marine terminating glaciers of the Cordilleran ice sheet all along the west coast of Vancouver Island.
Wow.
And those are potentially breaking off big icebergs with all sizes of sediment in it that float out into the ocean and can deposit clasts. So folks are asking how well sorted. So I don't know the details of the gravel and Cascadia Channel, but it's definitely an interesting story.
Okay, let's take a break.
Yeah.
You want a little water break or whatever, like you just continue to deliver. You got to be careful. I'm going to be asking you to come every Sunday at this point. I mean, come on. This is just too good, Joel. I'm realizing just now that Columbia River cutting through the Cascades at that spot is way older than the Ice Age. We're going back 20 million years easily with a Columbia River bringing sediment to the coastline. Now that we keep moving the position of the coastline, presumably over the past 20 million years with all these different major and minor advances of ice and sea level going up and down, I suppose. But I guess what I'm getting to is has the pre-Ice Age sedimentation of the Astoria Fan or other fans at the mouth of the Columbia been teased out? We're not really thinking the Astoria Fan as just Ice Age sedimentation, are we?
Yeah, I mean, we're gonna look at that. We're gonna talk partly that we only have this one core for the entire Astoria Fan. So the main takeaway should be we don't know.
Yeah.
But there is, they cored Pliocene sediment,
right?
And so there's stuff out there, but it's muddy. It's I don't know. I mean, we'll look at that.
Well, one other thing, quick, just along those lines. Yeah. I mean, if we are just talking about Ice Age floods coming down the Columbia River Gorge, aren't we stopping the water at all these checkpoints and these places where the canyon is choked down? So how do you get anything except silt out to the fan? Like, wouldn't you have anything bigger than silt stay home because you can't maintain that velocity all the way out to the edge of the continental shelf? Is that logic make sense to you?
Yeah. Yeah. So, we'll see in the Astoria Fan that we're looking at deposits of fine to medium sand.
Okay.
In the Astoria Fan, there's no gravel in the core we're going to be looking at.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's enough interruption for me. Let's go on to the next couple of slides.
Let's see what else. Great. So, so this, all we've done here now is overlaid. So this map is just what's at the surface. And what we want to know for going back in time is what are these deposits? What's beneath the surface? And so what we're looking at now is where we have cored where somebody's gone out in a ship and dropped a pipe down to the seafloor and actually cored sediment and brought it back up to study.
Okay.
And what you're looking at is black dots are places where we've got a couple meters of sediment.
Okay.
Which gives us the last 10 to 20,000 years. And these yellow circles are sites where drilling has gone back hundreds of meters, going back millions of years into time.
Okay.
And the main takeaway here is the distribution of coring sites. So scientists basically have not cored the Astoria Fan or the right. There's this one. This is the core we're going to be looking at, site 174. You'll notice there's a ton of shallow cores, and that's where all the earthquake records and interpretations of more recent processes come from. But in terms of going back deeper into time, we're limited to these yellow records. And so this site that gives us this window deeper into time for the Missoula floods is located here at the lower part of the Astoria Fan. It's downstream of where Astoria Canyon continues into Astoria Channel, and then you sort of lose channel definition. So we're on the lower part of the fan. And this is a good place for depositional records because a lot of these flows, we're going to talk about how they work, they come down through the canyon and they're erosive through here. They're actually potentially eating into this channel, and then they sort of spread out and they're depositional on the lower part of the fan.
Why are they erosive? Because of the sediment that they're carrying?
Yep, and because of the turbulence and the energy and the turbidity current.
Okay.
Yep.
Fascinating. Wow.
So but the big takeaway is just the sort of limited and patchy distribution of deeper records.
Yes.
Okay, so we're going to be ultimately not really satisfied with the record from what we'd want to understand the system is a lot of deep cores throughout the entire fan.
Well,
this is like going to the channeled scab line and looking at one outcrop and trying to tell the entire story. It's just not enough information.
Well, to be honest, Joel, if I'm allowed to dream really big, not only do we have folks watching at home who are just casual fans of science, but eventually some of these programs get to some young, promising geologists who are looking for projects. And my God, why wouldn't you say, we got to sink a few more yellow dots out there. Let's go.
Yeah, unfortunately, the government canceled the drill ship for the next 10 or so years. So there's not going to be much more coring in the near future. But there's a lot to be learned from the existing samples. Okay, people are asking about what even is a turbidity current. So I think that's what I have.
God, you're
next.
doing it all.
Just some geo.
I'm going to have a
Geo 101.
You're doing live chat. You're doing everything right now.
Yeah, I love the live chat. That's where but this just gives us some of the terminology of these systems, the continental shelf, which we've been talking about, these submarine canyons, and then at the outlet of the submarine canyons are the fans, and they're fed by these underwater movements of water and sediment called turbidity currents. Here's another cartoon of, this is pretty similar to what the Astoria Fan, the structure, what it looks like. Okay, submarine canyon, and then, we've talked about dendritic, we've talked about anastomosing. This is a distributary channel system. It's kind of the opposite of dendritic. Instead of channels coming together, they branch outward.
Yeah.
That's what we see on alluvial fans on the Earth's surface, and that's what we see on these submarine fans. And so you can imagine the flows coming down this canyon, going through these branches, and then sort of spreading out and building this fan outward onto the abyssal plane.
Yeah, I'd see those things were debouching from their submarine fan.
I wouldn't say that personally. So what is a turbidity current? This is a cartoon. One way they can work is from submarine landslides. So we've got this shelf, continental slope, loose sediment and slope instability. An earthquake can shake this loose. You can have gas hydrate in the sediment that dissolves and it collapses. Wave action, if it gets deep enough, can cause a landslide, or landslides can just happen. And that material, soft sediment, sort of collapses and flows outward under the influence of gravity. And you have a flow of water within water and sediment. And then one of the important parts here is that the deposit is down here at the bottom.
Okay.
There can be a lot of bypassing with turbidity currents. So the flow, it goes past the surface, and you have no evidence it was ever there. It just kind of flows over, and it leaves a deposit maybe down here lower on the abyssal plane. Yep.
Huh.
Here's one. There's really cool videos of these things on YouTube. People make them in fish tanks and flume tanks. This is one filmed at Western Washington University, and this is sort of a mental picture of what a turbidity current looks like.
Yeah.
So this is underwater in a tank, and you've got all this turbulence of sediment and water flowing across basically a flat surface. They started it on a little slope, and it just can flow for incredibly long distance. But they're pretty tough to observe in the modern ocean. We're not down there.
Sure.
So there's different models for how turbidity currents can originate. So that cartoon from NOAA showed this first model where they originate from submarine landslides. Another one, potentially the one that's relevant for the Missoula floods, is that they originate from an inflow of river water with high suspended sediment concentration. And then if the suspended sediment concentration in that river inflow is too low, as people have been really hitting on in the chat, freshwater is less dense than saltwater. So the flow actually doesn't hug the bottom, it flows on the top of the ocean, and sediment can settle out of that surface freshwater flow, and that falling sediment can then trigger destabilization of sediment and cause a turbidity current. And in this paper, they're actually hitting on that this is the main process we observe causing turbidity currents in a lot of modern systems.
Huh. So it's
but this one here is kind of our model for the Missoula floods. We think they probably came in with a lot of suspended sediment, and then we'll look at the Astoria Fan to see if we have evidence for this type of model.
Well, this is maybe out of place, but I'm reminded of when Andrea Balbus wrote that paper close to 10 years ago, and there was constant talk of this paper by Mix and Lopez or something about this big batch of fresh water going into the ocean. Where was that data coming from? And wasn't that big batch like in the neighborhood of like 22,000 years ago or something like that?
Yeah, I didn't put that record into here, but let's just go back to our map. That, if I remember correctly, is from I'm not even. I think it may be from this core all the way down here.
Oh, okay.
And we also have a record, and they're counting diatom species, and they see these peaks in freshwater diatoms that they link to the Missoula floods.
Okay.
So, and I don't know. I mean, I've looked at that and I've wondered, okay, the timing of that doesn't make sense to me.
Right. It's
so early that it's during a time when we have evidence of interglacial conditions at a lot of places on land.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it doesn't seem like those flows can be from Lake Missoula.
That was a curveball. That's good. Hey, viewers, we're coming to you, I'd say, in 10 minutes. I don't know how many slides Joel has left, but I want to involve you formally here. Joel's been keeping an eye on the live chat, but we definitely want to involve you. So hang with us for a few more minutes, and then we'll just turn totally to you with Joel.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, there's so much. I wanted to get the background of the marine isotope stages, deep time, and turbidity currents, and this geomorphic context. But ultimately, what I got is this: we want to go to the stratigraphic record.
Good.
From Site 174. So here's the context. Missoula floods coming in here. Chehalis coming in here.
Oh, yeah.
Can't forget about the Puget lowland outflow.
Yeah.
And then we have these distributary channels from Astoria Canyon distributing flow out onto the Astoria Fan. And we're going to be looking at what got deposited down here at the lower fan. So Site 174, this is that yellow dot we were just looking at.
Okay.
So So here's where it is. You can see this plunging reflector. This is the basaltic crust, and these are these sediments filling in the trench. Here's the trench. It's totally filled in. And this is the summary of the core. Again, it's a little disappointing. They only recovered 200 meters of sediment for a 900-meter stack of material there. So we don't have most of the record, even from the one place. We have a record. And then this is the stratigraphy. Oh, I've lost. But this is 900 meters of sediment here.
Okay.
And there's this upper package of big sandy turbidites. And these potentially are the Missoula floods.
Huh.
So what I want to talk about is, go ahead.
Isn't that what some of the papers were talking about? They thought they had belt supergroup lithologies in some of the sands or something like that. They were trying to make a case for Missoula for sure because of the match in the rock types.
Yep. And just the sedimentology of these things. So some of these turbidites are individual beds of sand that are several meters thick. So an inference that one could make is that the only reasonable process to generate such a thick bed of sediment is a huge inflow of dense sediment laden water. But as you said, that you might need other evidence to really say that it's Missoula. Oh boy. Okay. To say that's Missoula flood, or that it could be some other process. We can't fully rule that out.
Sure.
But the point is that the stratigraphy of the fan at that site is this really sandy, thick-bedded upper unit, overlaying this finer grained unit that has a couple little sand turbidites in it, but it's thinner beds, smaller, finer grain size. And one interpretation is that you're looking at the fan basically prograding out over the abyssal plain. So this change here is not a change in something happening on land. It's just the fan growing outward.
Yeah.
And so you're at this site where for this period of time, you were on the abyssal plain.
Right.
And then the fan sort of arrives over your head and starts depositing sand.
Yeah.
The other possible interpretation is that you're looking at a change of something happening on land, which we know there was some period of time before we had Lake Missoula and big floods and some period after. And you're looking here at the onset of big outburst floods coming down the Columbia River.
But we don't know where we are in time, do we, in this stack?
So that's the next slide, is trying to place it in time.
Okay. And
the way that's done is, so here's the stack again.
Yeah.
And now we're looking at, so in this column, we're looking at the same thing we started with, the oxygen isotope composition of foraminifera.
Okay.
And what we see is, and just focus on these, this one here. This is the same species that they use in the global compilation.
Okay. Yeah.
And so it has interglacial compositions here at the top of the core, which is what we expect. We're currently in the interglacial. And then we go back into these heavier compositions consistent with glacial ocean water. So this is the last glacial period, and we keep that heavy composition all the way back until we get to about 125 meters when we go back into the interglacial composition. So that puts the last interglacial period, 125,000 years ago, down here at 125 meters core depth. So that would imply that we accumulated around 100 plus meters of sandy turbidites during the last glaciation.
Okay.
And if we play that out and we're saying, okay, we have 100 meters in the last glaciation of sandy turbidites.
Right.
We don't have 30 or 40 similar stacks
Right.
below it, right?
Right.
We have another 100 plus meters of sand below it, but not several kilometers of sand. And some of these sand beds are quite thick, so it doesn't seem to be controlled entirely by just the simple model of the fan prograding out. There seems to be some influence of flow dynamics creating the sand stratigraphy. So one interpretation of this is that this suggests that we have, a couple episodes of Missoula floods similar to the last one.
Yes.
If this depositional model for the last glaciation is sort of consistent through time.
With an
very tentative.
Yeah, tentative
because there's so much else going on.
Right.
The dynamics of the fan. This could be related to the distributary channels switching around or the fan growing. But it's kind of all we have to work with. So we want to look at it, but be a little skeptical.
Well, the fact that you've got, okay, admit it's one hole. We got one core to work with.
Yep.
But everything's not younger than 30,000 years ago. I guess that's what I was expecting to see, that this Missoula flood story where everything, all the action is happening younger than 30,000 years ago. The fact that there is some of that rather significant sand bed that's gotta be older than 30,000 years ago, that's intriguing at the minimum.
Yeah, thank you. You said it perfectly.
Yeah.
There's sand beds below the last interglacial.
Yeah.
That's what all this stuff is.
Yeah.
So all this stratigraphy is that's our Spokane floods. Right? That's our reversely magnetized gravel, or reversely, whatever the gravels are under that's our depositional record of everything that happened pre 30,000 years ago.
There might be a few moments this winter, this might be one of them right here, where I wish Bretz was watching. Like if 100 years after his field work, and we're seeing things that, we're not selling this super hard that everything, Bretz was 100% right on everything, but there's occasional moments like this right here where, my God, there's that record that potentially is working with some of the narratives that were rolling around in the 1920s.
Yeah.
Very good. Can we go to the viewers, or did you have one more little?
I want to show you two more little things.
Good.
And then, so first of all, this is just what living foraminifera look like.
Yeah.
They're marine protists, which is a taxonomic grab bag of misfits. They're just weird. And they form these shells out of calcium carbonate, and then they have this streaming ectoplasm that comes out of holes in their shells, and they use that to eat bacteria and other really tiny marine organisms. They are extremely beautiful. And when they die, the ectoplasm dies, but the shell sinks to the bottom because they're making a mineral.
Yeah. And
this is what some of the shells look like. This species on the left is the major important benthic foraminifera, meaning it lives in the seafloor sediment. And this is what's used to make marine isotope stages. You pick these little things out. I've heard them described as they kind of look like Christmas trees.
Yeah.
They're gorgeous size. They're about they're sand size. They're about 100 microns.
Okay.
50 to 100 micrometers. And these are what have the ocean chemistry stored in the isotopic composition of their calcite shells. Okay. And then I just want people to see what that looks like. And finally, the last point to sort of tie it into the land records.
Good.
We're talking about these older floods on land and the dating of them. And you mentioned the reverse magnetization.
Yeah.
The other one is the calcrete soils.
Right.
And those being formed on top of old gravels is this key piece of field evidence for older floods. And these are dates on those calcretes. So The pink is the ones from Pasco Basin from this older field guide from the early 90s, and this is what's also in Bruce Bjornstad's paper about pre-Wisconsin flooding.
Okay.
And then these are some new ones from a calcrete and Moses Coulee that may or may not be on a flood gravel. It's on a gravel of some kind.
And that's your work.
That's my work. Yeah. So this is just to kind of preface what I think you're going to be doing next year, which is going to be looking at the dating for these older flood deposits and trying to tie it in to the Astoria Fan, to the marine isotope record, and to this longer story. So that's all I have. And I'm sure there's some great questions.
There will. We're just going to go right to the viewers and we'll just continue this discussion. If you've got another 10, 15 minutes, Joel, I'm thinking we'll do that. And then we'll say adios to you. And you can see the live chat as well as I. So I guess both of us will just grab stuff that appeals to us. Bonneville Flood asks Cindy, is that recorded in any of this? How important is the Bonneville Flood with what we're doing today?
Yeah, it's got to be in there. I mean, we haven't identified it, but it may have a distinct provenance signature because it's coming through the Snake River and potentially bringing in different material. But as folks have pointed out, in terms of provenance, all these flows are mixing together in the Columbia River and they're reworking sediment from prior flows.
Yeah.
So you're going to have the Bonneville flood come through, and then a Missoula flood will pick up sediment that the Bonneville flood brought. So it's tough to make these connections to a specific water source on land. And then again, we're looking at a bed of sand at the bottom of the ocean.
Right.
And you mentioned you can look at the mineralogy of the sand and other aspects to try to tease out the source. But so the answer is yes, it's down there, but I'm not aware of any work identifying, okay, this is the Bonneville flood.
Right.
Sand bend. Would it be the thickest one? Would it have unique zircons in it? Potentially.
Very good.
Somebody's future PhD thesis.
Let's keep it going.
Yeah.
I've already lost the question. Rachel, any chance of identifying volcanic ash in the cores? Isn't there Mazama that's been found someplace down there?
Yeah, the Mazama ash is huge, and it's in those Holocene cores. It's a regional marker. Prior to that, I'm not aware of. The problem with the ash is, the prevailing winds blow everything to the east. So you need a volcano that erupts a lot of ash into a river system, and then that comes out into the ocean.
Good. Keep it going. Candui, any thoughts of the large canyon north of the Astoria Fan, Olympic Tunnel Valley source outflow?
Right.
Yeah.
I think it's talking about the connection between the Puget Lowland Tunnel Channel Network, Chehalis outflow, and there's big canyons there. So I'm not aware of a Berg style paper looking at the buried channel connections. There may be one. I just don't know about how the Chehalis outflow connects into a submarine canyon. But it makes sense that there would be flows coming out of the Puget Lobe into submarine canyons.
Well, let's do that. Can we go back to that map with the two brown fans and zoom in pretty tight to see the canyons coming towards them? And I'll go back to rookie questions.
Maybe this one.
Yeah. Let's push in quite a ways. Yes, thank you. So, yeah, we were wondering about water coming through the Chehalis River Valley to the coast at Grays Harbor. Right in there. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And is it as simple as, what was the name of the other fan? The Astoria, and then the brown mob to the north?
Nidnet.
So
Nittinet, yeah.
Okay. Is that
the big source to the Nidnet is also the Fraser coming into the
that's what I'm getting at.
Wanafuka Canyon.
Oh, I see.
So the Astoria Fan is maybe simpler because it just has Astoria Canyon and then it distributes out onto the fan. The Nidnet Fan has, more, maybe a little more complexity in terms of sources.
Okay.
Going through with it, but if the Chehalis is coming out here, a lot of those flows may just get captured into the Cascadia channel and bypass the Nidnet Fan. So it might mainly be a Fraser Juan de Fuca outflow story.
Okay, related to that, so the Cascadia Channel, that's the one that threads between the two brown mounds?
Mm-hmm.
And so...
And then it comes at the edge here.
The edge.
It sort of marks the edge of the Astoria Fan.
So aren't people... Go ahead, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, yeah.
Aren't some people saying that some of the Missoula floods go way the hell out into the Pacific Ocean floor in the Cascadia Channel, or am I mixing myself up here?
Mm-hmm.
How are the flood sediments getting into that channel if the channel is skirting the edge of the Astoria Fan?
So, I mean, think of that cartoon of the turbidity currents basically bypassing the fan. So you can imagine a current kind of coming down here, and then it gets captured.
Oh,
this is a trap, and it's a depression. So it is weird to think about. And there may not be that many Missoula floods that come down Cascadia Channel, but the idea is that they come down, and they basically, this is like a gutter at the edge of your roof.
Yeah.
It captures the water running off the roof, and then it gets redirected via the gutter. And you can trace the Cascadia Channel all the way out here onto the abyssal plain. But if you look at some papers like Normark and Reed, they're looking at these thick sand deposits in here.
Wow.
And they think the flows are coming through Cascadia Channel. When they hit this corner, they're actually overtopping the channel, coming across this plain, hitting this ridge, turning the corner, and then ponding in here.
No kidding.
I find that I'm a little skeptical of that because of the lack of channels here. So you have to really invoke bypassing sort of broader sheet flows to explain that pathway. But they're the ones who have looked in real detail at heavy mineral compositions, and they think the sand provenance and the thickness of the sand sort of requires that Missoula source. Mm-hmm.
Doing great. How about three more, Joel? David wonders, any erratics found on or off of the continental shelf?
So the Griggs paper is all about the erratics in Cascadia Channel and on the seafloor, and he thinks there's some that can be linked to the Puget Lobe and some that can be linked to Missoula flood sources from Idaho and Montana.
Boulders are just like river cobbles.
It's called, I think they're cobbles and pebbles. I don't recall the.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I maybe David's wondering, like, if we had, well, I don't know what David's saying, but we don't have the resolution to map. If there's a bunch of big boulders on the continental shelf that's currently under sea level, we can't find those, can we? Well,
the continental shelf is really getting buried with silt, particularly offshore from the Columbia River. So, the fact that this channel is totally filled in. So let's say there were big boulders dropped there during the Ice Age. Almost certainly they would be buried in Holocene silt. So they'd be under the surface.
Okay, a bunch of people asking the same thing. So this will be our last question. Toughen Up Fluffy and Audrey are asking, can you untangle the effects of longshore current drift on the turbidite deposition? Calling back to your senior thesis, there was this drift business and ocean currents. How much does that screw up these piles?
Yeah, so right now in the Holocene, there's this silt deposit and longshore sand transport all along here, but it's on the shelf. And in terms of how that's working in the Pleistocene, presumably it's similar, and it's just sort of in the lower shelf because sea level is lower. But that only, at least in the modern system, that only takes sediment up to sort of halfway up the Olympic Peninsula. It really thins out, and there's very little sediment transport north of the northern Olympic Peninsula. So I don't think that can explain at least our records offshore Vancouver Island.
Yeah.
I could say a little more on that, but maybe that answers the question.
I think we're just right with that. Was a beautiful mix of detail, broad, and this kind of style I think is working just beautifully. So I think we'll cut it here, Joel, and I'm going to continue with some story hour about Bretz, but you're 2 for 2 with really delivering here, and we're so grateful to you for all your time and your energy you put into these appearances. So thank you so much.
I can't thank you all enough for the inspiration. I mean, I've been, laboring in isolation, and to have a community of people who's actually interested is really important for me. It's really a huge thing.
That is so great. Well, that means we have to have you back at least one more time after the new year. So let's think about when we'll bring you back at least one more time.
Well, I'll be in the chat for sure.
So. Good. All right, Joel.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Nick.
Have a good weekend. Have a good holidays, and we'll see you after the first of the year. Bye-bye.
Right. See you then.
Okay. Joel Gombiner, recent graduate of the University of Washington, resident of Seattle, grew up in Seattle, went to the East Coast for undergrad and came back to Seattle for his graduate work. What an inspiration that guy is. And I think he's inspired by what's going on here as well, as he just said. So, hope you enjoyed that. Before we sign off today, I promised that we would do just a little bit more story time with the olden days and J. Harlan Bretz. And my goal before we quit this morning, I'm thinking another 10 minutes or so, is to go through some slides that I have featuring some viewer mail and some other things that have been bubbling up. And we'll put a nice little bow on this first half of the alphabet and then take a break for Christmas, okay? So before I forget, reminding you, if you did not see this earlier, that we're about to finish this episode here, and the next time I see you will be Thursday, December 28th, 2023, at noon Pacific. And I'm almost sure that we will, let's say exactly. Let me lead up to what we're going to do. That's what we'll do. These slides will bridge us and get us ready for session K once I see you in late December. Okay, to the slides, boy, let's go. And actually, before the slides, let me just point out, reminding you now, I don't know, have you ever clicked on this, by the way? So here's another way to get to our episodes, in case you're not a fan of the playlist layout on YouTube. I take the time to post each of these here, and you can click here and get to the episodes if you haven't done that. But if we're just going to nickzentner.com, you remember last episode with Glenn Cruikshank, we were clicking on the word Bretz, and it's going to take us a while to get used to this, I think, but all the detail of Bretz, his papers, a magazine article that we're going to talk about briefly before we quit today, the field books, the field notes, the KMZ files that Glenn put together for us. That's how to find all that stuff. Please remember that. So that's Bretz. But there's another column, and that's where we're kind of cataloging these papers that were associated with each of these episodes. And yeah, Joel suggested 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 papers. And I think there were another 2 or 3 that I said, should I post those also, Joel? He's like, oh, it's probably enough. So if today's topic and the detail of today's topic intrigues you, I'm going to go back and read these now that I've had the discussion with Joel, and I'll be able to get much more out of these papers. But they're tied to episode J. If you haven't noticed, I'm telling you which episode these papers are tied to. Okay, to the slides we go. Keep it fast-paced as we quit. Talking to myself. So you recall a couple episodes ago, in kind of a real casual manner, I said, well, now I know about these marine isotope stages, MIS2, MIS4, MIS8, 6 thrown in there too. Getting tired. And I had a color scheme. And I want to just share what a few viewers have done to this point, and I'm guessing that there'll be more folks chiming in. So here's Ken in Idaho saying, well, I'll just take a look at my area. So here's a simple image of Flathead Lake and Lake Pend Oreille in northern Idaho, and this is Montana over here. And red is MIS2, that's the most recent glaciation, and then taking my color scheme, the blue for perhaps MIS6 or at least pre-MIS2. This is Sky Cooley, and this is Ken from northern Idaho. Thank you, Ken. Ann in Wisconsin had a different approach. She said, well, I'm going to be kind of artistic about it, and I'm going to have, here's MIS2 and 4 and 6 and 8. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you might have to rewatch the end of 2 letters ago. But I'm going to be thinking more and more about these marine isotope stages. And what I learned from Joel today is that some of these more recent MIS numbers are the big boys, apparently, according to that record. That was exciting. That's why I got so excited the first part of this episode today. That was a huge plot for me. So Wisconsin, where I'm from, 4 different advances there from Ann. Les in Illinois reporting that we've got the most recent advance over Chicago, Illinois, getting halfway across the state. But if we go back to blue, according to Les, MIS6, we got ice coming as this far, almost all the state of Illinois. There's a little bit of Illinois that did not get covered by these 2 most recent advances, pre-Illinoisan. Not to be outdone, Andy, who I think is a geologist that works at the Illinois Geological Survey, said, well, let me give you one of our professional cross-sections in Illinois, and I'll use your color scheme, Nick. So here's MIS2, MIS6. Purple, you might recall, was MIS8. You're like, why didn't you bring in the color sheet to remind everybody what your colors are? I left it at home. We got the house full of people. I didn't want to wake people up and go up and get that paper. So that's why I don't have it today. And Andy from the Illinois Geological Survey reports that there's some pre-Illinoisan that goes back at least MIS 22. Now, I need to follow up with Andy on that, apparently. But we're back in the Midwest and jumping way back machine. So those are some threads to follow through on, for sure. Raymond in Arizona talking about the San Francisco Peaks south of Grand Canyon and having some alpine glaciation there. And the youngest, the penultimate ice, and then the MIS6. Thank you, Raymond. And not to be outdone and bringing an apple for the teacher, Dirk from Germany, saying we've got ice sheet coming down over Germany, red, blue, purple for MIS8, and he made up a color of charcoal gray or something for MIS10. So appreciate, of course, anytime people are reaching out with their own contributions, it's encouraged and appreciated here. I can't say I use everything that I get, but much of this I will. And what I'll do with all these maps from around the world with our color scheme, I don't really know. But so far, so good. It's been fun. And just to reinforce, if you're thinking of doing this over the Christmas break, these colors are a way for me to keep track of these different ice advances in different places around the world. And we'll eventually land in Eastern Washington and realize there's only red on the map. There's only red. There's only the most recent advance. And if you're telling the regular Missoula flood story, you say, well, obviously, these floods were powerful. Haven't you done your homework? Anything older than red, anything older than 30,000 years ago, that evidence is gone, man. I don't know what you're looking for. The Missoula floods were powerful. They stripped everything clean. That's the explanation for why there's only red on the maps of Eastern Washington. But I just want to make sure that it's nothing but red. Might we find some orange, blue, or purple, or even charcoal gray if we dig into the Loess Hills and other places that maybe haven't been carefully thought about? All right. So finishing the Bretz timeline, mostly reporting on viewer mail. Thank you. We're still in this stage of J. Harlan Bretz, high school teacher, and now getting into graduate level geology. So a quick reminder from a couple episodes ago, Bretz taught for 4 years of high school in the Seattle area. And when he got to age 29, he said, well, I've done my field work. It's time to go back to school and get a geology degree for real and get a PhD in geology from the University of Chicago. And so he took his field notes from all of his exploring with his wife, Fanny, and his high school students, and he put together this publication in 1913. So away Bretz and Fanny go to Chicago. By the way, another ask. I don't know how you would answer this one, but I just like throwing these things out. No, this is what's more of a hypothetical or just kind of an open-ended question. How many times did Bretz and his wife Fanny take the train back to Chicago and Michigan for the holidays? When they're living out in Seattle for 4 years, it wasn't just the one train trip out to Seattle. And we were trying, remember Thomas in Germany, we're trying to figure out the route that Bretz crossed Eastern Washington for the first time in 1907. You know, did he really go along the mouth of Moses Coulee, and did the train go over the big gravel bar at Trinidad? Probably. Well, weren't there other train trips to go between Seattle and Michigan to visit the folks? Both Fanny and Harley are from Central Michigan. Maybe now we're up to 4, 5, 6 times that Bretz is crossing Eastern Washington, at least by train, just to go visit family back in the Midwest. Just a thought. So we're done with high school teaching, 2 years of graduate work, and the professors who are mentoring Bretz at the University of Chicago, Chamberlain and Salisbury. Remember those names. Chamberlain and Salisbury. They will be major characters, at least in the next few letters. Haven't really thought much about who was mentoring Bretz, really for the first time as geology professors nurturing this guy along. I guess up until this point, I just thought of Bretz being a grad student, and he's just sitting in his grad student office working with all his notes from Puget Sound and just typing up his report. But I guess for the first time, he's taking geology classes now, and he's having three-dimensional discussions about geology for the first time in a place that's well respected. Chamberlain and Salisbury. Okay. So he finishes his PhD in 1913, and what does he do? He comes right back out to Seattle, not to teach high school again, but to become a professor, an assistant professor at the University of Washington, the same school that Joel went to, same department that Joel has just spent the last 7, 8 years in. So viewers sent all sorts of stuff this summer. This is from a catalog, the University of Washington, during the 1 year that Bretz was a professor. And here's the Drumheller Fountain or whatever, and here's the Science Hall, the geology department was. This is maybe still where Husky Stadium is. I'm not quite familiar, as I should be. Here's that catalog. Thanks to the viewer, I can't remember your name, from the 1 year that Bretz was teaching as a brand new geology professor at the University of Washington. So who's in the geology department? In the office is in room 11 of Science Hall on the campus of the University of Washington. The department chair, the dean of the College of the Sciences, and the acting president of the university is Henry Landis. And there's 1, 2, 3 assistant professors, Saunders, Weaver, and Bretz, and Mr. Salisbury. I don't think that's the same Salisbury. Okay, and I need to figure that out. Who is this Salisbury? Is he the same as Salisbury as the guy that was back at the University of Chicago? So here's the guy that hired Bretz, apparently, who is, again, also the president of the University of Washington at the time, Henry Landis. Indiana University, another undergraduate degree, a Bachelor of Arts at Harvard, assistant at the USGS, state geologist in New Jersey, taught high school in I guess that's Maine, and then became a professor of geology at University of Washington in 1895. Henry Landis. And so here are some of the brand new geology, or the new brand new University of Washington professors. This is from September 14th, 1913. Bretz is one of the 5 new professors. And where did Harley and Fanny live that fall of 1913? In Seattle. Well, here's the address. I had help this summer from viewers. Again, don't have your names, sorry, but the detective work found where Bretz was renting a house on Sylvester Place along Ravenna Creek. Part of the Cowan Park story. Viewer mail. Here's the house that Bretz and Fanny were renting in the fall of 1913. You're like, who cares? What are you doing? I don't know. Do you like history? I like history. I like old photos, just in general. And if we're spending this much time thinking about Bretz, getting down to the level of where the guy was renting a house in Seattle in 1913, pretty damn fun, if you ask me. I don't know if you did. So does that house still stand? The house that Harley was renting? Sure it does. Viewers found it, sent me photos, gave me the address. So then I went on Google Maps and found the house. You have the address, you can drive by where Bretz was renting. Okay. All right. Well, one of the fellow assistant professors at the University of Washington was a guy named Ed Saunders. And these guys were working closely together. Here's Bretz and how he presented himself in the catalog. Albion College, we know that. University of Chicago, we know that. He just got his PhD. Taught in Flint, Michigan. There's the confirmation. Remember, I was trying to figure this out. The dates weren't quite adding up. Here's Bretz himself saying, yeah, I taught Flint for 2 years. I taught high school in Seattle for 4 years. Those are the exact dates. That all works out. Here's Saunders, a Canadian apparently, Harvard, Ontario. Edwin Saunders, the guy that taught hand in hand with Bretz, was a professor of geology at Washington State Normal School, Ellensburg, Washington. And Saunders was in Ellensburg, 1898 to 1905. Then he went to Harvard to get another degree. Then he came back to frickin' Ellensburg, 1907 to 1909. Some of these old books I've been holding up to the camera and showing you, they belong to Saunders, when he was the geologist here at Central Washington University, called the Normal School back then. Interesting little connection that way. Well, there's more than just the little connection. There's some drama. So before we get to the drama, here's Saunders when he was teaching here in Ellensburg. This was, I think, the entire university faculty. But back to the University of Washington, at the time, the geology program had courses just in numbers. So instead of Geology 101, you took General Geology 1 and then General Geology 2, and then you advanced on to Geology course number 3, 4, 5, and so on. So here's Saunders and Bretz teaching basically introductory geology. If you continue in geology at the University of Washington in 1913, you can take course 5, Common Minerals and Rocks, taught by Professor Bretz. Look what Sharon in Malaga found from a newspaper article dated Sunday, November 16th, 1913. Hey, man, if you come a few days later, Wednesday, November 19th, I guess, who's giving a talk, a free science lecture, the first of free of the free popular science lectures will be given under the auspices of the Mountaineers and will take place tonight in the hall of the Postal Telegraph Building. The speaker being Professor J. Harlan de Bretz, University of Washington, and his subject will be Geology of Puget Sound. There will be many lantern slides, no technical language, and no charge of any kind. 8:15 p.m. Thank you, Sharon. So I'll cut to it. Why did Bretz leave? Bretz had his dream job. He knows Puget Sound. He's back out in the Pacific Northwest. It was Israel Russell that encouraged him to go out. He's within a day's train trip of the channeled Scablands, although he doesn't know it at the time. Why did he leave? Why did he only last 1 year at the University of Wisconsin? Why did he only last 1 year at the University of Washington? I think in one word, the answer was Ed Saunders. And as the story goes, Bretz didn't get along with Saunders. Professionally, did not get along with him. Saunders was a lab guy. Saunders was a, let's study the minerals and the rocks and the fossils and the things, everything done in the walls of the geology department. Bretz is like, screw that. Get out in the field. Let's do as much teaching in the field as we possibly can. And so that philosophical difference, I'm sure there's more to the story, but the basic story is this guy didn't want to teach in the field. This guy preferred to be in the field and not in the classroom. And they did not see eye to eye. And possibly, I forgot that at home too. It's upstairs when everybody's sleeping. More memories from Bretz, and it's pointed about Saunders. Whether I read that or not, I don't know if I'll do that. But anyway, that's the main story about why Bretz only lasted 1 year. But before things became difficult between Bretz and Saunders, Bretz was excited enough about his new job at the University of Washington to build a new house and to start a family. Again, the viewers have come through. Back in the summer, I told this story a little bit, and I asked the viewers a few months ago, can we find where Bretz built his house in Seattle? Not the one he's renting, the one he actually built, assuming that he'd spend his whole career, his whole life and career at the University of Washington. And we found the house. It still stands. So, first step from a viewer was, I got creative and I looked up the birth certificate of Harley and Fanny's first child. They named him Rudolph, and he was born in Seattle on July 12th, 1914. By this point, Bretz has already decided he's going to leave, and he's on his way to Chicago with a 3-month-old son. But the reason I share this with you is here's an address. This is not the rental house. This is the house that Harley and Fanny built. Well, more viewer help. It's like, well, I think we've got a street address. This is all out of sequence now because I can't remember how it all fell together. But at some point, one of the viewers emailed me this document. Let's go to the website. I say, let's go to the website. Where'd it go? Oh, I lost the website. Screw it. If you go under Bretz on nickzentner.com, go down, it says magazine. That's an article in a magazine talking about this new house built by Bretz, but there was no address. There was just a couple of old photos of this bungalow house, and it was in a bungalow magazine. I've got the actual cover of the magazine now. Let's go to it. I'm almost done. So there's a walking tour today in Seattle, a neighborhood walking tour, a tour of homes, essentially, a history lesson. Viewers found this as well. And sure enough, one of the houses on the walking tour is the Bretz house. rustic craftsman bungalow, built in 1914 from the plans of well-respected. Okay, you got it. The house was built for J. Harland Bretz, who became a geology professor at the University of Washington the same year the house was built, although the following year he accepted a faculty offer at the University of Chicago. Bretz became internationally famous for his theory of glacial flooding in eastern Washington from prehistoric Lake Missoula. So this was that original magazine. And again, this summer, I'm going back and forth with live streams and other video programs like, can we figure out where this house was? Does it still stand? Well, it was the birth certificate that gave us the address of this thing. And are you ready for the big reveal? I'm really milking it now, if you haven't seen this. Ready? Oh, yeah. Magazine from 1914. Google Maps Street View from a couple of months ago. I even put a little transition between these two slides. I'm having too much fun. There's even a little bird's nest that has shown up in the last 100 years. 110 years. So this house still stands. I have not taken the time to drive over to Seattle and visit the house in person. And of course, I wouldn't bother the people living there now. I don't know if they must know a little bit about whose house they're in. But the concept that this beautiful house was built by this young family and the new baby on the way and then leaving for Chicago, there must be more to the story about why Harley left for Chicago. This is my final little touch. It's kind of borderline invading these folks' privacy, but whatever. Again, I'm just on Google Maps zooming in. Look at what, apparently this is what Bretz had done in the siding of his house, a little Mount Rainier thing with a moon. And so, why would he leave the University of Chicago in the summer of 1914 and head back to the University of Chicago? Did I say that wrong? Why would he leave the University of Washington and go back to the University of Chicago, this time as a professor? I don't know if I'm that interested in getting into all the gory details about why the University of Washington did not work for Bretz. I'm not sure I'm that interested. But I am interested, and this is what I'm going to be doing over the break, is learning more about how that geology department at the University of Chicago was built. And it must have been a good place for Bretz as a graduate student. It must have been so positive and so field-based that he decided he wanted to come back. Now, how much was he recruited by his former professors to come back as a professor? Was that an agreement all along? Bretz, if you get a PhD here at the University of Chicago, we'll figure out a way to hire you as a professor in a couple of years' time. No idea of that. But a key part at the University of Chicago that is a big part of the Bretz story, which to me has not been explored at all, is not only arriving in the fall of 1914 and staying his entire career, but this is the guy. Again, thanks to Sharon and Malagatz for sending me a bunch of email information about Chamberlain. But I feel a very close connection to this handsome guy because he grew up just a couple houses or a couple of towns away from me in southern Wisconsin, separated by a century, of course. But he went to Beloit College. That's Beloit, Wisconsin. I have connections there. He was the main geology professor at the University of Whitewater, University of Wisconsin, Whitewater. Where did I go as a college freshman out of high school in southern Wisconsin? I didn't go straight to Madison. I went to UW Whitewater, which is the closest college to where I grew up in Fort Atkinson. USGS, University of Wisconsin, where I went to school, University of Chicago. And this guy is a big, towering figure over much. He was the president of the University of Wisconsin, the whole university. And he was the guy that created the department at the University of Chicago. And I think, but I'm not sure, was on the thesis committee of J. Harlan Bretz. So if you need a tease to come back after Christmas break, one, it's to learn as much as we can about T.C. Chamberlain. Yes, he's going to be the next main character in this winter series. And then also, right after Christmas, Bretz is teaching in Chamberlain's department. Bretz says, can I start a field course and bring students out to the Pacific Northwest each summer? And Chamberlain and others say, absolutely. That's what this place is about. We are not a lab-based, classroom-based department. We are a field-based department. And so within a couple of years, as World War I is looming, Bretz starts 2 field courses, a sophomore level field course at Baraboo, Wisconsin, and a graduate level field course where he goes out to, you guessed it, Eastern Washington for much of the 1920s. A toast to you. Here's to you and your health at this very special time of the year. Here's to the health of all of your family and friends, and I hope that you enjoy time with some of those special people in these last couple of weeks of December of 2023. Here's to our guest today, Joel Gombiner, University of Washington, who I think had a good experience at the University of Washington. Bretz didn't. Here's to Joel for his maps, his energy, and his ability to convey complicated detail to us regular folks. Here's to Joel. And a special thanks to the live viewers. We still have more than 800. I'm sure this is the longest show we've done. To have you stick around to the very end of these episodes is especially meaningful. Thank you. Ignore the phone. That's probably Liz. Where are you? Let's, one last time. When will I see you next? I will next see you Thursday, December 28th at noon Pacific. And then we will march right on through January and into February with our regular schedule, Thursdays at noon Pacific, Sundays at 9 a.m. Pacific. Thanks, everybody. Happy holidays. I enjoyed spending time with you today. I hope that you enjoyed spending time here with us. And if you haven't had a chance to catch every one of these episodes, you can get caught up over the break. Thank you. I love you. And goodbye from Ellensburg, Washington, USA. Goodbye. Marshmallow.